Okay, that's going. Go ahead, Peter.
Good morning. Today is March 16th, 2022. This is a public information meeting. I'm Councillor Peter Allen, District 9. Present today with us are Mark Fredericks of the Planning Department, applicant Jerusha Young, representative of the Ravenhill Vineyard and Retreat, and Alan Connors. So we're going to start with a presentation from Mark Fredericks. And I just mentioned at this point that there have been no evaluation or decisions have been made up to this point. So Mark, when you're ready, you can start.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm just going to share this screen here, go through a few slides. So welcome. We do have a planning application that we're looking to hold this public information meeting for. This public information meeting is regarding a planning application from Jerusha Young and Alan Connor, who are on the call today. They're the owners of Ravenhill Vineyard and Retreat in Lower Wolfville. And the owners of this agricultural property have requested permission to add 2 farm stays on the property. And because it's agriculturally zoned, this can be considered through a development agreement rather than as of right permitting. So the purpose of this meeting hopefully is to inform the public of this planning application, review some of the planning policies that we look at, and hopefully to receive some feedback from the surrounding community and the neighborhood. The proposal again is to add 2 farm stay kind of cabins to the property. They may look something like this. And again, because it's agriculturally zoned, this is considered through a development agreement. And these cabins would provide accommodations for a kind of immersive farm stay experience on an active vineyard and an active farm. And the owners, I think, are hoping to share this beautiful landscape that they have with their guests. And again, we just talked about this, but the property is zoned agricultural and all of the area around it is also zoned agricultural. We're just east of the town of Wolfville boundary. That's this gray area here. And so everything east of that in Lower Wolfville is zoned agricultural. So the property has a couple existing buildings. There is a dwelling shown here and a couple of agricultural buildings or equipment storage sheds for tractors and tools. But most of this property is planted with grapes. So there are rows and rows of grapes growing to support the wine industry. And this is sort of what it looks like. There are a couple of other accessory buildings, but these are the main buildings on the property. And again, that house that we just saw is located sort of down here, close to Highway 1, close to Main Street, near Wolfville. And the agricultural buildings or those sheds are kind of up here in the middle. And then these proposed farm stay cabins would locate way up here, along, very close to Maple Ridge Road. And my understanding is they would be accessed from a driveway on Maple Ridge Road. So those cabins would be positioned up here, and this is sort of an elevated part of the property. Largely it slopes towards the north, but the south part is quite beautiful, and of course offers a great view out across the Minas Basin. And again, here's just a photograph of that view. This is the sort of view from Maple Ridge Road or close to Maple Ridge Road. Looking down towards these sheds, and then the dwelling is over beyond that. So again, this property generally slopes towards the north, but there is some undulation, and as a result, there is some low spots and maybe areas where air doesn't flow as well. And so the applicants did have some farm crop loss in recent years, and that's this photograph was submitted by the applicant here, showing some of that loss in the grape crop. And it's been expected that this has something to do with perhaps the low-lying areas and airflow in those areas. So it's this sort of location where there's been some crop loss, where the 2 farmstead cabins are kind of proposed close to Maple Ridge Road in an area where some of the crops are not doing very well. And so the proposal is to remove just a few of these rows and tuck a cabin or 2 in the back here. So there's a planning strategy at the County of Kings, which does enable this option for farms to consider this kind of addition to their property. It does allow council to consider by development agreement farm stays that would provide guests an opportunity to learn about and participate in farming activities. And in considering these kind of proposals, council looks at a bunch of criteria. The first is that it's accessory, that the farm stays would be accessory, to an operating farm business, and that the income from the farming business exceeds income from all other sources. So there's some pre-qualification just to verify that the farming business is the primary source of income. The other criteria looks at maximum setback, and largely these criteria are about location, where these buildings could locate. A maximum setback is kind of the opposite of what setbacks are often referring to, where a setback is usually a minimum. You're at least 40 feet from one property line, or at least 20 feet from the sideline, or so forth. But a maximum setback in this case aims to reduce the number of buildings in the middle of a field, if you will. So a maximum setback from the road for any proposed structure would minimize disruption to the land in production. And of course, there are lots of different reasons for having buildings in the middle of things, but generally, when we're looking at kind of a more residential style building, it's planning policy here that establishes a maximum setback to ensure that those buildings are at least close to a road. Criteria C looks at total number of farm stays limited to 2, and that's what we're looking at here today. 2 farm stay cabins. So this continues on this next slide. Criteria D is quite long and detailed, but it looks really what this is describing are the different scenarios that the municipality would be open to. Primarily, this looks at new buildings, and in this case, we're talking about new buildings, but this policy requirement, this criteria, allows for considerations of farm stays being non-permanent, things like yurts or caravans. It also considers retrofitting, maybe an old barn or a conversion of some other agricultural building that may be in the area. Sometimes it's a conversion of a dwelling or a place of worship. Again, these seasonal structures. But essentially, if we're converting a barn, we're looking at a 500 square foot maximum. But in this case, we're looking at new buildings. And so we would look at, we look here, the proposal consists of new buildings. If it does, each farm stay unit is limited to a maximum building footprint of 500 square feet. And if the proposal consists of new buildings, council shall be satisfied that the location of those new buildings minimizes potential negative impacts on current and future farming practices. So again, we want to make sure that these are not giant houses. We want to make sure that these are relatively small cabins. 500 square feet is not a giant unit. And again, we want to ensure that the location of these is appropriate for not just the current farmers, but future farmers going forward. And so the location criteria are largely one of the main points of this list of criteria. So again, we want to make sure that the location of those buildings are sort of close to the road, out of the middle of a farm field, and again, to ensure future farming is possible. The last 2 here comply with provincial legislation and meet the general development agreement criteria. These are fairly consistent across all of our development agreement applications. Those general criteria, there's more than these, but this is just the highlight. We look at the potential financial impact. Sometimes development agreements include new roads, not in this case, but sometimes there is a financial impact on the municipality. We look at the proposal, whether it's in keeping with the intent of the planning strategy. And in this case, certainly there is intent for farmers to be able to do this kind of thing, add a couple of farm stays to an existing farm. We look at feasibility of services, be it well water or septic. And certainly there's a lot of land mass to accommodate that here. We look for potential land use conflict. Are there other neighbors immediately adjacent to this area? Do they have concerns? Is there anything that we could do to minimize that kind of land use conflict? We look at impact on potential well field areas, and in this case, there aren't any well field areas here. The Wolfville well fields do cover a lot of the county, but it's on the western side of the town, so no concern there. We also just look at the general site suitability. Is it a giant marsh? Is it wet? Is it steep? And on a recent site visit, certainly it's a suitable site, staff believe. So those are the sort of general criteria that we look at as well. Again, most of the criteria are around farm land preservation, ensuring that the location is reasonable and allows for continued farming in the future. And then, of course, we look at the general criteria for kind of every planning application. So these are kind of a set of standard criteria that we also review. And those sort of criteria get reviewed and get reviewed in a staff report that goes to the Planning Advisory Committee. That staff report will include the development agreement in this case, which will include some back and forth between the applicants and staff on, positioning of the buildings and potentially screening if there are any kind of land use conflict concerns that come up. But largely, what we're doing here is sort of an early step in the process to hear from the community if there are any concerns or any comments that neighbors want to share. This is the time, hopefully, that we would get that input from the public. And again, that goes to the Planning Advisory Committee sometime in the future, and then they send a recommendation to Municipal Council. And Municipal Council would give first reading. They would organize a public hearing as well, and then give it second reading or final consideration. So the process is kind of long. There are a number of steps. There are more opportunities to become engaged if you are a member of the public and you're interested. This is the first step for public information and public feedback. And then there's also this public hearing step as well. So there are lots of steps involved, and there are opportunities for the public to get engaged. The public hearing is advertised in the local newspaper, and individuals who receive letter mail regarding this public information meeting will also get a letter mail regarding the public hearing, so in advance of that. So that's kind of where the planning side of this comes in. There's a lot of criteria and a lot of review, a lot of steps, but largely what we want to get from this stage in the process is to hear from the community, hear of any concerns or any comments. And you can reach me directly or the applicants. You can reach me at 902-690-6276 or by email mfredericks@countyofkings.ca. So thanks very much. I'll pass it back to Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mark. Jerusha, do you have any comments you'd like to add to the presentation at this time?
The one thing that comes to mind is, just to speak to concerns that I would have if this were going to be happening next door to me. I know initially when we moved here and we saw some of the other things that were happening, development-wise in the area, it was a bit challenging to adjust to the fact that agricultural settings, especially close to an urban center, do require a bit of adjustment, not only in our mindset in terms of the tranquility factor, but just also like there's a lot happening for people that makes it necessary for us to start thinking outside of the box in terms of sustainability. And so that's one of the reasons that we started looking at the farm stays as an option for us to help improve our sustainability here, especially with crop failures like what we experienced last year and the year before. So we're not wanting to put something in our site that is going to be problematic for us or for other people in terms of disruption to everybody's sort of sense of well-being, but at the same time we are trying to find a way forward that makes sense for us over the long term and for our children, who we hope will be continuing to invest themselves here as well. And so the farm stays is one of those opportunities where hopefully we can begin to educate people a little bit more about the value of being out in the outdoors, working on the land, and understanding why farmers do what they do and what it takes to do what they do. It's we're quite often so disconnected from those things that we're not appreciating some of the needs for farmers to diversify and to start making some changes. Yeah, I guess that's it. And we're trying to be as gentle as possible. We're doing everything organically and striving to move towards an even safer option than that. And you know, those are the ways that we're committed to, you know, the community in terms of the ground effects on the groundwater and the harm that sprays can cause and stuff like that. Yeah, so Alan's just saying to remind folks that when we first came here, the land was dead. There were no worms in the soil or anything like that. It's quite alive now. And can we improve it? Yes, we can. And we're striving towards that. But those things cost a lot of money when you're working that way. And it's more so than conventional farming. And we're trying to offset some of those costs with this adventure as well.
Very good. Thank you, Jerusha. And Mark has provided his contact information on the screen. And I just add that if you have any comments or questions, that you provide your name and address when contacting him. And you have up to 30 days to post any questions or comments to this presentation. And with that said, that concludes our meeting today. And thank you for everybody that come out. That's the end of the meeting. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Peter.